The hollow, between us. Some truths are buried not in time, but in the woods. There's a place in southern Oregon where the trees stand too still, where the fog hangs a little heavier than it should, and where stories don't just get lost, they hide. 17 years ago, a 10-year-old boy vanished without a sound in those woods. His name was Sam. No body, no trail. Just a red wool scarf snagged on a pine branch, and the gutted silence of a father who never stopped listening. Now, late one October night, that father, Merritt Darnell, a man most folks in Mountain Pine call the ghost in the cabin, hears a sound that should be impossible. It's coming from an old transistor radio in his kitchen, a radio with no batteries. A boy's voice, faint, cracking through static. "Daddy, it's dark here. The trees don't sleep." That's where our story begins, with a voice that shouldn't exist, and a man who refuses to let go of the past. Some men chase monsters. Others find out the real monster is what happens when you stop believing in what you once loved. Now lean in, because Merritt's not just about to reopen an old wound. He's about to walk straight into it. And in the hollow between memory and myth, something is waiting. The wind had a way of speaking in the pines. Long after the birds went quiet and the coyotes gave up their chorus, the trees kept whispering, just enough to make a man remember things he'd tried for years to forget. Merritt Darnell sat in the old rocking chair by the window, the one with the cracked spindle and the squeak that only came when it rocked left. His cabin leaned into the forest like it had grown tired of standing upright. Moss dripped from the shingles, and the porch steps groaned when the cold settled into the wood. It was the kind of place that looked abandoned from a distance, but Merritt was still there. Still breathing. Still waiting, maybe. 17 winters had passed since Sam disappeared. The boy had been 10, red-cheeked and fast-footed, all teeth and questions. One moment, Merritt had turned to grab the tackle box. The next, Sam was gone. Vanished into the woods behind Klamath Creek like he'd been swallowed whole by the land. They searched for weeks. Helicopters, bloodhounds, volunteers in orange vests shouting into the trees. Eventually, they found a scrap of flannel near the rocks, shredded. The search official handed it to Merritt and said the word no one wanted to say, cougar. It didn't make sense. Sam was fast, smart. The woods weren't supposed to take children without leaving a trace. Still, the trace was all he got. That, and silence. Since then, Merritt had lived alone on the edge of the world. No wife, no friends left who still came calling. The only thing that stayed was the room. Sam's room. He never changed it. The twin bed with the spaceship comforter, the drawings taped crooked to the walls, the moon chart still tacked to the closet door. Merritt didn't go in often, but he made sure the dust never had a chance to settle. That night, the rain came sudden, like it had been waiting behind the clouds for a cue. Wind rolled off the ridgeline and rattled the tin chimney. Merritt stood in the kitchen with a chipped mug of coffee and a Marlboro burning low in the ashtray. The radio on the shelf crackled, silent but alive in its own haunted way. It hadn't worked in years. A Zenith 1959 model with a cracked tuning dial and rust on the grill. Merritt kept it because it used to play Sam's favorite show, that old Western drama with the coyote howls between scenes. Sometimes, on cold nights, he'd still turn the knob out of habit, just to hear it try. But tonight, something turned it back. No power outage, no storm surge, just the soft whine of static cutting through the air like a knife. And then, voice. It came in soft at first, like a dream heard from underwater. "Daddy!" The mug slipped from Merritt's hand and cracked against the floor. Coffee bled into the boards. "Daddy, it's dark here." The voice wasn't a recording. It wasn't some old cassette buried in the circuits. It was live, breathing, fragile. He stepped closer. The static pulsed. The voice came again. "The trees, they don't sleep." Merritt stood still, heart thundering against ribs that hadn't felt panic in years. His hand reached for the radio, but didn't touch it. He was afraid that if he did, it would stop. that maybe it already had. And then something caught in his throat, something sharp and raw. That name. The way the voice said, Daddy. Not Dad, not Pa, not even Pop. That exact soft lilt, Daddy, was how Sam used to say it when he was half asleep, curled up under Merritt's flannel jacket by the fire, or scared after a nightmare and needing to be held. No one else would have known. Not his school teacher, not the search team. Only Sam, only them. Outside, thunder cracked like a gunshot across the ridge. Wind shoved against the cabin. But Merritt didn't hear it. His hand was already reaching for the photo frame on the shelf beside the radio. It was old. Glass cracked diagonally across the middle, just shy of Sam's smile. Merritt had never replaced it. His thumb traced the line like a scar. Sam was standing by the lake in summer, holding a fishing pole too long for his arm span, grinning with 2 front teeth missing. Merritt sat down hard in the chair. Not because his legs gave out, but because something heavier than the years had hit him. A second chance, or a trick. But Merritt didn't believe in ghosts. He believed in grief, and he believed in pain that made the mind chew its own tail. But not ghosts. Still, his hand shook. The rain softened. A hush fell over the ridge. Inside that silence, Merritt whispered the words before he knew he was speaking them. If you're still out there, I'll find you. His voice cracked. He hadn't heard it out loud in a while. Not like that. Not filled with fire. I don't care what it takes. The radio hissed again, then went dead. No final message. No fade out. Just the quiet creak of the house breathing. Merritt didn't move for a long time. His eyes stayed on the photo, and his hand stayed on the radio dial. By the time morning came, the rain had stopped. The world outside gleamed wet and clean. But something inside had already begun to wake. Something that hadn't stirred in years. Because if there was even the smallest chance, he would go into those woods again, and this time, he would not come back alone. Morning hung heavy over the Klamath Ridge, the kind of gray that soaked through wool and bone. The rain had stopped, but the forest still wept. Branches bowed with moisture, ground pulpy with rot, and fog curling between the trunks like something alive. Merritt's boots squelched with every step as he moved past the edge of his porch, his breath ghosting ahead of him. He hadn't slept. Not really. He'd sat beside the cold radio until dawn, listening for a voice that never came back. But the silence didn't shake the feeling. Something had shifted. Something deep. Old. Something that had waited 17 years for a door to crack open. The rifle slung over his shoulder was an afterthought. Habit more than intention. He wasn't hunting today. He was following. He took the long trail down behind the cabin, the one that led toward the creek. A narrow strip of silver water that swelled after every rain. Sam used to throw rocks from the bank there, naming them like pets before letting them go. Merritt hadn't walked this trail in years, not since the sheriff's dogs picked up their last scent here. But this morning, the woods were humming in a way he couldn't ignore. Not just alive, but watching. At the bend near the alder grove, he saw it. One footprint, half sunken in the mud. Massive, wide, 5 clear toes. Human-shaped, but twice the size of Merritt's boot. Fresh, still wet around the edges. And beside it, a smear of something darker than dirt. Blood. Not red, not deer red. This was thicker, almost black, with a shine like oil under the clouded light. Merritt knelt slowly, reaching for a stick to prod the smear. But something caught his eye first. A scrap of cloth. Pale blue, frayed at the corners. Embroidered with small red thread. S.A.M. His throat closed. That handkerchief had been in Sam's coat pocket the day he vanished. He remembered Martha sewing it, back when small things still mattered. He stared at it now, limp in the ferns like a signal from another world. Somewhere beyond the trees, something whimpered. It wasn't human. The sound was high, trembly, wet like a cough, but softer, almost apologetic. Merritt rose, every muscle suddenly taut beneath his coat, and followed it. The rifle stayed strapped. Whatever made that sound didn't feel like something to shoot. He found it by the water, hunched under the arch of a fallen pine, where the creek hissed through moss-covered rocks. Small, curled, covered in dark matted fur. It breathed in shallow pulls, twitching with each gust of wind. Merritt inched closer. The thing turned slightly. Not an animal, not a bear cub. Its shape was wrong, limbs too long, hands too human. The face shadowed beneath a crown of tangled hair, or maybe it was fur. It was hard to tell. But its eyes, they blinked like a child's. Behind it, just across the creek, a rustle, then a crash. Something heavy. Merritt spun and saw it. Another figure, larger, staggering through the brush. Covered in the same dark fur, but this one stood hunched, swaying. Blood streamed from its abdomen, soaking down its legs. A metal jaw trap clung to its side, teeth sunken deep into muscle. The thing, whatever it was, fell to one knee, panting like a furnace. But its eyes locked with Merritt's, sharp and wet with pain. For a second, neither moved. Then it looked down. Slowly, painfully. It raised a massive hand and nudged the smaller one forward. Not a push, not a threat. A gesture, a giving. The little one looked back, trembling, then crawled forward toward Merritt's boots. He didn't run, didn't flinch. It stopped a foot away, gazing up. There was something ancient in its face, something almost familiar. Its chest rose and fell like it had never known stillness. One tiny hand reached out, fingers tipped with nails, but shaped like his son's had been. It pressed against his boot and stayed. Behind them, the larger one groaned, its breath ragged. It didn't approach. It didn't try to pull the child back. It just watched, then lowered its head. Merritt's arms moved without thought. He bent down, slowly, carefully, and gathered the small creature into his coat. It didn't fight. It burrowed into him, shaking but not in fear. In cold, or exhaustion, or something else entirely. Something older than language. The larger creature remained by the creek, chest heaving. The trap's chain rattled. Merritt met its eyes one last time. "Thank you." He didn't say it aloud. But the words were there, somewhere between them, carried by breath and understanding. He turned back toward the cabin, the little one pressed tight to his chest. It was lighter than expected. Warmer, too. Its breathing slowed. A whimper escaped its throat. Not animal. Not quite human. Something between. By the time they reached the porch, the sun had burned through the edge of the clouds. The light that came through the trees wasn't golden, but pale, muted, like someone had put the whole forest behind frosted glass. Merritt paused at the door. He felt the weight in his arms shift. The creature, no, the child, looked up. Its eyes were dark, impossibly deep, and yet something lived in them. Something not wild, not lost. He pushed the door open with his foot, carried it inside, and laid it down on the old couch by the fire. The blanket he used for winter nights now became a cradle. He turned the heat up, put water on the stove. The rifle stayed by the door, untouched. For a moment, Merritt just stood there, watching it. Watching this strange, half-known thing sleep. Then he sat down, hands trembling again, and let his gaze drift to the mantel, to the photo, to the name. The same name that had been whispered into the radio last night. The name on the cloth by the creek. The name he'd said every night, alone, into the dark. Sam. And for the first time in 17 years, Merritt felt something stir in his chest that didn't ache. It was faint, fragile, but it was alive. The wind shifted in the late afternoon, and the woods outside the cabin turned strangely still. No birds, no creaking trees, just a breathless hush, like the forest was leaning in to listen. Merritt stood by the wood stove, staring down into a saucepan of oatmeal that had thickened too long, steam curling up in lazy spirals. He stirred it once, slowly, like he wasn't sure who it was for anymore. Behind him, the creature, no, the child, sat curled on the couch, wrapped in the heavy quilt Merritt used to keep for blizzards. Its small body rose and fell in gentle rhythm. Though it wasn't quite sleep, it didn't close its eyes the way a person would. They stayed half-lidded, alert, even in stillness. He'd given it a name earlier, when the silence got too big to sit with. Fern. Something about the way it curled up reminded him of the young fiddleheads that burst out of the snowmelt every spring. Fragile but ancient. Soft, but not weak. He hadn't said it out loud to the child yet. Just to himself, like a test. The bowl clinked gently as he placed it on the coffee table. The child flinched, then shifted, crawling toward the bowl on all fours. Its fingers gripped the edge like it had never seen a bowl before. It sniffed it, nudged it, then tasted with a long lick, cautious and curious. After the second bite, it sat back on its haunches and spooned the rest awkwardly into its mouth using both hands. Sticky oats clung to its chin. It looked at Merritt like it didn't know whether to keep going. He chuckled, soft, barely audible, then slid an old Polaroid from his pocket. A photo worn soft at the edges, the colors faded like a summer dream. Sam, at 6 years old, on a porch swing with a bowl of oatmeal in his lap and a wild mop of hair standing straight up like he just rolled out of bed. That grin, that look of half surprise, like the camera had caught him mid-thought. He held it up cautiously and showed it to Fern. The child stopped chewing, stared, then, slowly, it reached forward, one finger extended, and tapped the center of the photo, right on Sam's face. Merritt's breath caught in his chest. The child didn't smile, didn't frown, just studied the image like it was trying to make sense of a memory that didn't belong to it. Then it turned its eyes back to him, dark and endless and searching. Merritt stepped back. He pulled the old cigar box from the mantel. Sam's keepsakes. Things too small to matter to anyone else. A paperclip chain, a smooth river rock with a smiley face drawn in Sharpie, and a block of pine wood, maybe 5 inches wide, with a carving scratched deep into its surface. A circle with crescent edges and dots around it. Sam called it his moon mark. Said he saw it in dreams. Merritt placed the block beside the empty oatmeal bowl. Fern froze. Then, without hesitation, picked up a pencil Merritt had left by the radio and dragged it across the surface of the coffee table. The wood hissed under the pressure. Not scribbles, not lines. A symbol, carefully drawn. A circle. Crescent edges. Dots. The same one. He stared at it, heart banging hard against his ribs. A sound escaped him, half gasp, half something else. Memory, maybe. A younger version of himself, crouched beside Sam's bed while the boy traced that same mark on the foggy window with his finger, murmuring, "They come when the moon's shaped like this." Merritt sat down slow, like his legs forgot what they were for. The old couch groaned beneath him. Fern watched him, still and calm. Then did something that shattered him. It crawled forward, cautiously, hesitating only once, then reached for his hand and placed its palm over his. It was warm, real, slightly rough like bark or callus, but soft in the center. And it held on, not tight, just enough to say, "I'm not afraid." Merritt's hand trembled. He didn't pull away. Night settled with a long exhale through the trees. Somewhere deep in the forest, an owl called once, then again. Fern perked up, ears, or what might have been ears, twitching. It leapt off the couch and padded to the door, crouching low like a scent had drifted in. Merritt followed, grabbing the flashlight and slipping his boots on with a speed that surprised him. Outside, the ground glittered with frost. The stars were faint, hidden behind high clouds. But the moon was there, big and swollen, not full, not quite. A shape that matched the carving perfectly. Fern stepped out onto the porch, gazed up at the sky, then raised both arms. It let out a soft, low wail. Not pain, not hunger. Something older, like morning wrapped in song. The sound echoed through the trees, caught in the branches, and drifted outward. Then it dropped its arms, sat down cross-legged, and rocked gently, back and forth. Merritt stood behind it, watching, as something inside his chest cracked open again. He'd seen Sam do this, long ago, on the nights Merritt and Martha fought too loud, or when the fever made Sam sleep restless. He'd wander out to the porch, sit down just like this, and whisper things to the moon. Said it helped the nightmares go quiet. Fern turned slightly, as if feeling the thought. Then did something else that made the cold slam into Merritt like a wave. It curled up on the porch boards, face to the sky, arms around its knees, and began to hum. Not words, but the melody. The lullaby. The one Merritt used to sing on hunting trips when Sam couldn't sleep. A tune he'd made up, never written down. A melody that should have died 17 years ago. He dropped to one knee, hands over his mouth, chest shaking. The moonlight spilled over them both, silver and soft, as the humming faded and Fern drifted off. Later, back inside, Merritt placed another log on the fire and watched the flames lick higher. He didn't know what this meant, if it was a trick or something more impossible. But he knew one thing: this child didn't come from nowhere. It came from the forest, and maybe, just maybe, it came from Sam. That night, he didn't lock the door. He didn't even close it fully. Let the wind carry in whatever it wanted. Let the pines whisper, let the creek murmur its secrets. He sat in the rocking chair, holding the wooden carving in his hand, eyes on the fire, and whispered something only the wild could hear. I'm still here, and I'm listening now. The air had weight to it that evening, like the woods were pressing in from all sides, holding their breath. Merritt felt it in the soles of his boots as he trudged past the blackened stumps and scorched moss, deeper into the slope where the lightning had kissed the forest 2 nights before. Smoke still lingered, sweet and sharp in the back of his throat, curling low around his knees like something alive and restless. Even the trees groaned quieter here. Fern had woken just before dawn, trembling in his sleep. Not cold, not fever, a different kind of shaking. Animal instinct. The kind that told you something's wrong before the world caught up. He wouldn't eat, wouldn't move from the hearth, just stared at the door like it had turned into a mouth. Merritt couldn't shake the feeling either, and he sure as hell wasn't about to sit still. The ground cracked beneath his heel where the fire had eaten through a root system. Pockets of white ash sighed open with every step. He stepped into a clearing where the trees had burned hot and fast. Some fallen, some standing like skeletal ribs. That's where he saw it. The body. It was sprawled on its side near a split pine, fur charred and twisted, but enough of it intact to know this was no bear. It was taller than Merritt even while lying down, shoulders massive, feet broad and long, toes splayed in the ash like fingers. The skin around its chest was split clean down the middle, peeled apart like something had opened it. The cavity was empty, no heart. Merritt swallowed hard, bile slick at the back of his tongue. He crouched low, ignoring the ache in his knees, and studied the body. The jaw hung open. Not a snarl, more like shock. The fur around the mouth still wet with blood. It hadn't been dead long. Flies hadn't even found it yet. Whatever had done this, it wasn't here to eat. It was here to send a message. He backed away, slow, careful, like he was walking on a frozen lake. Every hair on his arm stood up. The wind picked up, carried a scent with it, sour and damp, copper underneath. More blood, but not from this one. From somewhere close. He followed it. 50 yards down the slope, near a rock outcrop cloaked in shadow, he found prints in the soot. Different sizes, some as wide as a man's torso, others smaller, lighter, 3-toed, 4-toed. None of them matched Fern's, and they weren't heading away. They were circling, doubled back, like a patrol. like they were looking for something, or watching something. A dry crack of a branch snapped behind him. He spun, rifle raised, but nothing moved, except for the stillness. It had shifted. Less empty now, less alone. He turned back toward the trail that led home, picking up pace. Every instinct said to run, but he didn't. Not yet. His hands trembled against the stock. His breath came fast, too loud, and the shadows between trees looked deeper than before. As he climbed the ridge, a shape caught his eye. High up, standing dead center on the spine of the hill, framed against the dusk like a cutout. It didn't move, didn't flinch, just watched. Merritt squinted. At first it looked like a stump. Then the shoulders shifted slightly. Wide, rounded, the arms long, resting low. The shape was wrong for a man, but the posture wasn't wild. It was deliberate. Then the wind turned, and light caught something hanging from its neck. A circle. No, 2 circles. Woven from twine, looped through a charm of weathered beads. The kind a child might make for their father at summer camp. The kind Merritt had made for Sam one winter, twisting string and beads by the fireplace after Martha passed. Sam had tied it on and never took it off. Not even when he vanished. Merritt felt the ground tilt under him. His breath stalled in his throat. He blinked, stepped forward, and the figure vanished. Gone. Not a sound, not even brush movement. He ran. Didn't care how loud the boots were now. Didn't care about cover or footing. He barreled through the trees like a man 20 years younger. His chest burned, not from exertion, but from something deeper, older, buried in marrow. The memory of a small hand gripping his finger at the hospital. The way Sam used to hum when nervous. That necklace, that damn necklace. When he burst through the tree line near the cabin, the porch light was flickering. Fern wasn't inside. He froze, then heard it, whimpering, close, beneath the porch. He dropped to his stomach, scraped his elbows raw against the boards, and peered under. Fern was huddled in the dirt, curled tight, eyes wide and glowing faintly in the dark. Not from light, from fear. Merritt reached out. Fern didn't flinch. He pulled him out gently, brushed ash from his fur, and held him close. Over the ridge, somewhere far off but loud enough to carry, a cry echoed. Long, sharp, not human, not entirely beast. Fern tensed. Merritt gripped him tighter. That night he lit every lantern in the house, stacked firewood against the back door, poured salt along the windowsills, not because he believed in superstition, but because doing something felt better than nothing. When Fern finally fell asleep, Merritt sat in the rocker, fingers closed around the wooden moon symbol Sam carved all those years ago. The flames in the hearth crackled low. Outside, the wind howled. But beneath it, if you listened hard enough, there was something else. Steps. Too many. Too close. And somewhere deep in that sound, Merritt understood. They weren't the only ones watching, and they weren't alone anymore. The fire had died low in the stove. Morning had broken but hadn't reached the hollows yet. Just thin strips of gray light threading through the cabin's single window. Merritt sat hunched at the kitchen table, eyes fixed on Fern, who crouched silently by the door, nose twitching at something outside. It had been like this since just before dawn, still, watchful, like waiting for a knock that hadn't come yet. But there was no knock, only that cold breath of pine and damp soil pressing in through the cracks. Merritt knew that smell. It was the same scent the earth gave off right after a burial. He stood, stiff from a sleepless night, and slung his pack over one shoulder. Fern didn't move. Merritt reached down and brushed a hand against the top of his thick, bristled head. The child leaned into it for a second, then let go. The cave was farther than he remembered. Past the split boulder where he used to hunt grouse, through the bramble cut that tore holes in your coat no matter how slow you moved. It took half a day. The cold didn't ease. The deeper he went, the more the shadows bled into one another. Every so often he'd hear something behind him. Crack, shuffle, but it never came close. By the time he reached the mouth of the cave, the sun had fallen behind the ridge. Just that lingering wash of gold, barely catching the lip of stone. He stepped inside, careful not to call out. The air changed immediately, thick, stale, humming with the memory of old breath. He clicked on his flashlight, let the beam glide across the walls. Moss, scratches, bones in the corner. Not fresh, not arranged. Just forgotten. And then, tucked into the side, under a ridge of rock like a child's attempt at hiding a diary, he saw it. A notebook. Torn, warped, water-stained at the edges, but unmistakably human. He reached for it like it might bite him. The first page was too smudged to read. The second, less so. The handwriting stopped him cold. It wasn't his, but it was Sam's. Slanted letters, too big for the lines, misspelled words and symbols doodled in the margins. He could hear his son's voice in every letter. And the words, God, the words. They didn't kill me. I stayed. The ache in Merritt's chest split wide. He lowered himself to the ground, flashlight trembling slightly as he turned page after page. Each one told pieces of what happened. Sam had been hurt when he disappeared. Twisted ankle, couldn't move. The cold had started to bite. He thought he would die there, under the ferns, until something found him. Tall, quiet, gentle hands brought food, laid moss over his skin. He called it Ash. They didn't speak, not with words, but with movement, with drawings scratched into the dirt, with rocks laid in shapes. Sam had tried to leave, more than once, but Ash wouldn't let him go. And then others came, different, bigger, not kind like Ash. Some of them watched from the trees. Some didn't want him there. He kept writing what they showed him, writing what they wouldn't let him forget. And buried deep in one of the pages, half torn, frayed to the edge, Merritt found something else, a drawing, rough but unmistakable. A figure like Sam, standing between two larger figures, and in front of him, smaller, not childlike, child, half lifted in the arms of one of the creatures. And there, just beside the image, written almost as an afterthought in crooked scrawl, "Her name is Fern." Merritt dropped the book. The flashlight clattered. His hands went cold. The silence inside the cave grew deeper, like the rock itself had taken a breath. He leaned back, hands braced on the stone, trying to hold himself up. That name he gave in a whisper 2 days ago, the one he thought he made up. Sam had written it first, long before, long enough that the ink had begun to fade. He stood, slowly, like moving too fast might shatter him. He picked up the notebook, pressed it against his chest, and walked out of the cave without looking back. The forest didn't speak on the way home. No branches snapped, no birds cried. Just that steady hum of something vast moving just behind the veil. When he reached the cabin, Fern was waiting by the porch, arms wrapped around his knees. No sound, no question, just warmth. Merritt stepped inside, laid the notebook gently on the table, and sat. He looked at the boy, no, the child, and something shifted. Not in fear, not in shock, but in knowing. This wasn't just some strange thing found in the woods. This was blood. This was Sam's blood. His blood. Alive. Sleeping under his roof. He reached for the photo again. Sam in that ridiculous oversized fishing hat, beaming like the sun was something you could wear. And he wept. Not quiet. Not controlled. But deep. Like a man finally realizing the thing he lost might have never left at all. Outside, the wind stirred through the trees. But for once, it didn't sound like mourning. It sounded like a secret, one the wild had been trying to tell him all along. The first sign wasn't footsteps, it was the birds. All at once, like someone flipped a switch. The songbirds that had returned with the thaw vanished. No calls from the jays, no rustle from the chickadees. Just that heavy, unnatural silence that told Merritt something human was on the wind. He stood on the porch, the sunrise cutting through the trees in slanted lines, and felt the old feeling crawling up his spine. Not fear. Not yet. But the familiar weight of something approaching that didn't belong to the rhythm of the woods. He went inside. Fern was sitting cross-legged by the wood stove, turning pages of Sam's notebook with reverent care. He didn't read, at least not the way people did, but he stared at the lines long enough that it felt like he understood every crooked word. Merritt knelt beside him, pulled the child's hand away gently, and said nothing. He went to the drawer, took out the old revolver he hadn't fired since the year after Martha died. The one with the wooden grip Sam used to run his finger over while asking if it was real. It still was. He loaded it without ceremony, no drama, just routine. Then he stepped out into the clearing again, and that's when he saw them. 3 trucks. Big ones. Matte green, modified, rolling slow up the unpaved logging road like they knew exactly where they were going. The kind with antennae curling up like insect legs and glass too dark to see inside. The front truck stopped before reaching the tree line. A man stepped out, tall, barrel-chested, sunglasses, gray in his beard. But Merritt knew him before he ever saw the face. Judd Rollins. 17 years vanished into that man's shoulders. But the way he stood hadn't changed. Like he owned the ground under him. Like he could crush something with a decision and never feel the weight of it afterward. Judd was the kind of man who once believed in forests and fire lines, and Merritt had once believed in him. He walked down the hill toward the cabin without raising his voice. "Merritt," he said. Like they'd just seen each other last month. Merritt didn't answer. Judd stopped a few paces out, planted his boots, and looked around with the kind of slow, practiced scan you learn from years in search and rescue. He wasn't here to find something. He was here to collect it. "We've got folks saying you've been off-grid a little too long," Judd said. "Reports about strange signals, wildlife acting erratic. We're here to run some tests." Merritt shook his head once, slow. "Don't lie, Judd. Not here." Judd took off the sunglasses. His eyes were pale, sharp, but tired. "You got it, then?" "The thing." Merritt didn't move. Judd sighed, almost disappointed. "I was hoping I'd find it before you did." He motioned to the truck. Another man stepped out. Young, clean-shaven, clipboard in hand, wearing boots too new for the mud they stood in. Behind him, 2 more, armed. Merritt said, "You think I don't know what this is?" Judd raised his hands, not to surrender, but to control. "It's biology, legacy. You and me. We used to care about the land. Remember that? We saved lives once. You saved mine. And I'd take it back if I knew you'd grow into this." Merritt growled. Voice low but clear. Judd didn't blink. "What we're doing is bigger than you. This isn't about one kid lost in the woods. This is about a discovery that changes everything." "You mean profit?" "I mean purpose," Judd said. But it was too smooth. Too rehearsed. Merritt knew that tone. Had heard it in the mouths of men who once spoke of conservation and now built fences through wilderness. He glanced back toward the cabin. Fern hadn't come outside, but Merritt knew he was watching. Judd took a step forward. "Give us the child." Merritt's hand slid toward his coat pocket, not for the gun, but for the compass Sam had made from bottle caps and magnets when he was 9. Still worked better than half the tech the feds used. He ran his thumb along the edge, the way he used to when Sam was afraid to sleep alone. He said, "You don't understand what he is." Judd nodded. "I do. Better than you. That notebook, we got a copy. Found the cave before you did." Merritt felt something rupture in his chest. Judd kept going. "Kid wrote a hell of a tale. Almost makes you believe he meant to stay. But you and I both know the wild doesn't love us back. It uses us. That thing's not your grandson. It's a door. And we're the ones who get to walk through it first." Merritt stepped closer, eyes burning. "You come near him again," Judd interrupted. "You'll do what? Shoot me? That the plan, Merritt? Burn the last bridge to a world that actually cared when your boy went missing?" Silence. Wind in the trees. A whisper of movement from the porch. Fern was standing there now. Not hiding, not cowering. watching. The child's eyes glowed faint amber in the low light. Judd turned and saw him, and for a moment, Merritt saw something like awe flicker in his face. Not fear, but desire. Like he'd seen a miracle and wanted to own it. Merritt stepped between them, the revolver in his hand now, low but ready. "You're not taking him," Judd exhaled. "You're making the wrong choice." "I've made worse," Merritt said. "And I lived with all of them." Then he did something that surprised even himself. He turned to Fern. He dropped the compass at his feet. He pulled the notebook from his coat and tossed it into the fire pit. Pages flared up instantly. All that was left of Sam's words, burning into ash, smoke curling into the sky like a final breath. Fern looked at him, confused. Merritt nodded once, slow, then spoke, quiet enough that only he could hear. "No one gets to use you." He turned back to Judd. "You leave now, or the forest decides for you." Judd hesitated, then signaled with 2 fingers. The other men stepped back. The trucks reversed. No shouts, no threats, just quiet withdrawal, like a retreat through sacred ground they never should have entered. Merritt watched until the last engine growl faded. Then he looked down at the ashes of the notebook and knew that sometimes the only way to protect a story was to let it go. But he hadn't let everything go, because buried under the floorboards now was a map, and under the map, a key. And in the eyes of the child standing beside him, firelight flickering in black pupils, was the weight of something older than blood, something that hadn't finished speaking yet. The path narrowed as the trees grew denser, pressing in from both sides like they wanted to keep him out. Merritt ducked under a limb slick with moss, mud pulling at his boots with each step, the cold nipping higher up his legs now. Fern moved ahead of him, faster than usual, but not playful this time, guided by something, a scent, a pull, or maybe just memory. They hadn't spoken in hours, not since Merritt lifted the floorboard and showed him what had been hidden all these years. The hand-drawn map, the old compass, the bone-carved pendant Sam used to wear around his neck. Fern didn't say anything then, just took the pendant and nodded once, like it had been waiting for him all along. They climbed higher than Merritt had in years, up toward the ridgeline where the fog curled low and gray like breath held too long. Snow still clung to the shadows. The wind was different here, not cruel, just expectant. Like the land was watching, like it remembered. Near the top, they found the stone opening, half hidden by brambles, just wide enough for a man to squeeze through sideways. Fern didn't hesitate, dropped low, slipped inside. Merritt followed slower, scraping his shoulder on the rock wall. Inside, it opened, gradually, then suddenly, into a hollowed-out space that didn't feel made by erosion or to time. It felt carved, chosen. Something about the walls, the way the lichen grew, the echo of his footsteps, felt intentional. Like this place was meant to keep something or someone in. Fern waited near the far side, his back to Merritt. The light from the entrance spilled long shadows across the cave floor. Shapes began to separate from the dark. Movement without sound. Eyes glinting in the gloom. They weren't alone. Merritt's hand moved to his side, where the revolver used to sit. But it wasn't there now. He'd left it behind. On purpose. One of the shapes stepped forward. It wasn't Fern. It wasn't like Fern either. Smaller. Thinner. The hair shorter, but the same dark sheen. Skin pale beneath the fur at the joints. Its arms hung by its sides, still as stone. Then Merritt saw the face, and stopped breathing. The eyes were human. Not exactly. Not entirely. But close enough that the air thinned in his lungs. Wide, uncertain. Framed by features he couldn't name, but recognized. The chin, the cheekbones, the curve of the ear. All echoes of a face he hadn't seen in 17 years. Merritt took one step closer, then another. He opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came. The child stepped back. It didn't run. It didn't cry, just watched him with something between curiosity and warning. Then it bent down and began drawing in the dust with its finger. A symbol. Circle, crescent, dots. The moon mark. But this time, the circle was cracked down the middle. Split. Merritt dropped to his knees. He wanted to call a name, but he didn't know what to call it. Sam, no. This wasn't Sam, and yet he reached into his coat, pulled out the last thing he hadn't let go of. The photo. The same Polaroid. Sam on the swing, gap-toothed, alive. He held it out. The child stared, then reached up, touched it gently, and for the first time made a sound. A word. A name. Ash. The whisper was dry, rough, not practiced, not easy. Merritt froze. His heart rattled in his chest. Ash, the child said again, pointing toward the far corner of the cavern, where the dark turned almost blue with depth. Fern turned now, walking slowly toward that shadow. Merritt followed, and there, laid across a bed of moss and carved stone, was a body, twice the size of a man. The fur grayed with age. Eyes shut, chest still, but not empty. Sam's jacket, wrapped tight around one shoulder. Merritt stepped closer. The hand resting over the jacket was massive, weathered, and unmistakably dead. But the way it held the fabric, protective, reverent, was almost human. Like a parent watching over a child who couldn't come home. There was something beside the body, carved into the stone. Crude. Letters. Assam. Not scratched by a child. Etched deep, firm, final. Merritt felt his legs give out. He sank to the ground. It was here. The truth. Sam hadn't vanished. He'd become part of them. Raised a child with them. And died with them. Fought, maybe. Protected. Or simply belonged in a way Merritt never let himself imagine. Fern sat beside the grave and began to hum. The same tune. The lullaby. But this time a second voice joined in. The hybrid child. Two melodies, raw and low, rose together like a wind through hollow bones. Merritt watched, listened, and cried. Not for the first time, but maybe for the last, because the ache was different now. Not loss, not guilt. Just the hollow space left when something sacred has finally been spoken. When the hum faded, the child stood, walked past Merritt without touching him. Out toward the cave mouth. Fern followed. But before leaving, Fern turned. For one breath. One heartbeat. Merritt waited. Hoped. Fern looked him in the eye. Then turned away. No wave. No goodbye. Just the silence of something that had never belonged to him to begin with. And Merritt, left behind in that cavern of rock and moss and memory, knew he'd found the last piece of Sam. But he wouldn't get to keep it. And maybe that was the only way it could survive. The storm broke just after nightfall. Not loud, not wild, just steady, like the sky had given up holding back. Rain whispered through the pine needles, brushed the roof like fingertips over old wood. Merritt stood in the doorway of the cabin, the door half open, his hand resting on the frame, waiting for something he didn't name. The fire behind him flickered low, casting long shadows over the floorboards. The air smelled of wet moss, old smoke, and memory. Then he saw it. Fern, standing at the tree line, soaked and motionless. His fur darkened with rain, head bowed. But Merritt knew it was him, even in the dark. Even after days had passed since the hollow. He stepped forward, heart thudding heavy, but stopped when he saw what was hanging around Fern's neck, a woven loop of twine and faded beads. The bracelet. Sam's bracelet. The one Merritt buried with him beneath the cedar, 17 winters ago. The one Martha made with trembling hands after his fever broke that first time. He remembered placing it in the small wooden box with the carved pine cone on top, laying it gently beside Sam's photo and covering it with soil. It was here. It had found its way back. Fern raised his head. His eyes were full of something Merritt hadn't seen before. Not fear, not confusion. Something like knowing, understanding. Farewell. Merritt stepped closer, barefoot in the mud now, the ground cold. He didn't notice. Fern took one step back, then another. and Merritt knew. This was goodbye. He nodded once, slow, then motioned with his hand, not calling, but guiding. He turned toward the path that led beyond the creek, past the ash meadow, to the place Ash once called home. Fern followed. The rain thickened. The trees leaned close. Each step sank deeper into the earth. The clearing was smaller than Merritt remembered. The moss had grown thick again, and the rocks were darker, slick with age. But the place was the same. The stones still circled where Ash's body had once been laid. The same hush hung here, the kind that swallowed breath and words whole. Merritt turned to Fern. He reached out, gently removed the bracelet from his neck, held it in his palms, then knelt and placed it atop the largest stone. Fern watched, and Merritt spoke. I don't know if he ever came back here. I don't know if he ever got to say what he wanted. But if this is where you remember him, then it's where he should stay. Thunder rumbled low, far off over the ridgeline. Behind them, branches snapped. Figures moved through the trees. Merritt rose slowly. The hunters had followed. Judd's voice cut through the storm. "Step aside, Merritt." He was there. Rifle raised, rain streaking his face. The others fanned out behind him. One had a tranquilizer gun. Another held a net. Merritt moved in front of Fern. "No, you had your moment," Judd said, stepping forward. "This isn't yours anymore." "This was never yours," Merritt said, louder. "You don't take what you don't understand." "You don't get to decide what's sacred," Judd snapped. "Neither do you." Judd raised the rifle. The world slowed. Merritt didn't think, didn't plan. He moved, threw himself sideways into the path of the shot, arms wide. The crack of the gun echoed like a crack in the sky. Pain slammed through his shoulder, white hot, tearing everything open. He dropped to his knees, the ground cold and spinning. Blood poured from the wound, soaking into the moss, mixing with the rain. He looked up. Fern was screaming. Not growling, not howling, screaming. A sound like grief turned inside out. Like a child watching the world fall apart again. It dropped to Merritt's side, hands on his chest, shaking, crying out with a voice that didn't know what words were supposed to do. Just sound and ache and shaking muscle. Merritt's hand found Fern's face. "You're okay," he whispered, barely breath. "You're okay." Gunshots didn't follow. The forest roared. Not wind, not storm. The trees moved. Figures stepped out. Dozens of them. Tall, silent, watching. Bigfoot. Their eyes glowed faint in the rain. None spoke. None charged. They stood still, and the forest stood still with them. Judd took one step back, then another. His rifle lowered. Merritt felt Fern's hand on his cheek. He smiled and closed his eyes. The pines swayed, and the wild remembered. Later, no one knew how long, the rain stopped. The cabin didn't survive the fire that came weeks later. Lightning, they said, or maybe just time catching up. But when they cleared the ash, when the search teams tried to find remains or records or maps, they found nothing. No bones, no notebooks, no signs of life. Only one thing remained. Just outside the burn line, near where the trees still whispered. A single stone slab, carved by hand, weathered, with 7 words. He walked into the wild, and the wild remembered, and nothing else. Just the wind through pine needles, and the hush of something too old to name. Still watching, still listening, still waiting. Some stories don't end with answers, they end with echoes. A fading trail through the trees. The hush of rain in a place no map dares name. The silence left behind when something wild steps back into the dark. Not every truth needs to be spoken to be real. Some truths live in the space between what we know and what we're willing to believe. They whisper in the quiet hours, carried by the wind through pine needles, waiting for those who still listen. This was never just a tale of the unknown. It was about the ache of memory, the fragile thread between grief and grace. About what it means to lose someone, and what it takes to keep part of them alive in the way we remember, the way we forgive, the way we hold on to hope even when the world tells us it's gone. Sometimes what we think we're chasing isn't a mystery to solve, but a part of ourselves we buried in sorrow. And when we find it, if we're lucky, it doesn't come back as it was. It returns changed, wilder, but no less sacred. There are places out there untouched by time, where the line between what is human and what is not grows thin, where the wild doesn't just survive, it chooses. It keeps what matters. And if we're willing to see with more than our eyes, to feel with more than just memory, we might understand that what's lost is not always gone. Some bonds go deeper than blood, deeper than names, deeper than any one life. They stretch through the roots, through the stone, through the very breath of the forest. In the end, it's not about monsters. It's about mercy, about finding meaning in the quietest gestures. A hand reached out, a lullaby hummed in the dark, a single step taken toward something unknown but necessary. That's where the real story lives. Not in what was seen, but in what was felt. In the way the wild gives us back pieces of ourselves, if we're brave enough to walk into it and not expect to return the same. Thank you for spending time with this story. If it moved you, even a little, if it made you think, remember, or feel less alone, consider leaving a comment below. I'd love to hear what stayed with you most. And if you'd like more stories like this, filled with mystery, heart, and the spaces between, don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring the bell so you don't miss what's coming next. Out there, beneath the canopy of everything we think we know, something is still listening, and maybe, just maybe, it's waiting for you.